Hello, David. We're coming to you from a bunch of different places today. And again, this is an interview that I'm not going to be hosting. I'm just doing tech support, but I'll lead us into it. So at Christmas time, I got my mom a book for Christmas because that's the kind of son that I am. I get books for people as presents. But the book that I got for my mom was this really interesting sounding book that's out from Pluto Press called The Cost of Free Shipping by Jake Ali Mohammed Wilson, or edited by Jake Ali Mohammed Wilson and Ellen Reese. And this book sounded really interesting to me, and I'm really looking forward to getting to read it myself, especially because since then it's also won awards for, best books. For example, it won the Best Book Award from the United Association for Labor Education. Just a very important book that focuses on Amazon's role in the global economy. So I got it as a present for my mom. She read it. She loved it. And so I set up this interview with the authors. So listeners will be aware of my mom, Dr. Gina Huckmacky. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Ann.
But why don't I have the authors briefly introduce themselves for the audience, and then, Mom, you can take it away after that.
Hi, everybody. Hi, David. My name is Jake Ali Mohammed Wilson. I'm a professor of sociology at California State University, Long Beach. As Henry mentioned, I'm one of the co-editors. I'm holding up the book right now for the folks on podcast of The Cost of Free Shipping, Amazon and the Global Economy. Shout out to Pluto Press. We appreciate them very much. So check out Pluto's great list of books. Happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Reese. I'm professor of sociology and chair of the labor studies program at UC Riverside, and also co-editor of The Cost of Free Shipping, Amazon and the Global Economy.
And I'm Gina, and I'm going to be interviewing you, and I thank you so much for allowing me to do that. I really, really love the book. I thought it was a great culmination of the Amazon's business model, government regulatory lapses, political insight, environmental and community impact, combined with all the worker testimonials. It really drives home the monopolistic concerns of an organization like Amazon. And so with that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how Amazon began, and then how did it progress to becoming one of the biggest, massive, dominant e-commerce entities in the world?
Yeah, well, Amazon began as a bookseller, an online bookseller, and, has swiftly become this massive, multifaceted corporation. And, I think one of the points that we're making in this book is that, the rise of Amazon wasn't just simply due to, entrepreneurial skill and good business decision making by Jeff Bezos, the founder and original CEO of the corporation, but rather to a particular style of capitalism that we call Amazon capitalism, that it's helped to promote and push forward. And there's many facets to this corporation, but I think some of the distinct qualities it has is it's really helped to promote this sort of one-click consumerism, that makes it very, very easy for consumers to purchase goods online and then have them delivered to your door. Very, very convenient. And, the demand for home delivered products has just really escalated, especially during the pandemic, but, originally it was just books, but then it quickly became the everything store as more and more products got introduced. And Amazon, as we and other contributors in our volume document, it's a multifaceted corporation, right? And so, it's also, in addition to being this online retailer, it is also this high-tech corporation as well. And it provides all sorts of surveillance technology, not just simply for disciplining its own workforce, but also for surveilling citizens, for consumers as well. Every one click of that mouse where we're purchasing goods, the company is sort of surveilling that, monitoring it, using that to figure out, how to what we want to buy and for how much, and so on, and surveilling that not only among it's the goods it's producing and selling, but also for all the third-party vendors using its platform, which more and more vendors have become dependent on.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jake?
Yeah. Just to follow up with a little bit of what Ellen was mentioning. As a corporation, we also we thought it was as an important site to study contemporary capitalism, right? So oftentimes when we discuss capitalism and exploitation, and it's sometimes can feel hard to like whittle down. But as a site, as a corporation, Amazon epitomizes so many of the aspects of contemporary racial capitalism, right? So there's one thing that we were kind of interested in exploring was how this tech company, has built this massive physical infrastructure with over 1 million workers, and this massive impact in the economy, is one of the fastest growing corporations in the world. It will soon overtake Walmart as the largest private employer in the United States. But the other kind of goal of our book was to have a global analysis, right? Where we incorporated worker struggles, community struggles, and organizing from various countries around the world.
One of the things that I noticed with their beginning is that they were able to bump off physical store booksellers with the tax advantage. And so speaking with that, as well as how did Amazon's business model differ from Walmart? So from both a bumping off competition, it started really with bumping off the competition of physical store booksellers by not having to pay taxes in communities that they were in, to evolving to this a little bit different model than a Walmart. Can you speak to that and how they achieve it?
Sure. So currently, Walmart is the largest corporation in the world, right? And Amazon is right behind them and growing. I think what just fundamentally, what Walmart and Amazon have in common is they're both massive corporations that have really gained in prominence and power through their mastery of logistics, right? The movement of goods. So behind me is an image of the port of Los Angeles. I live in Long Beach, a port city. And the efficient movement of these goods has been a key to the rise of retail power in the global economy. But what we found was many of the practices of moving goods, logistics, that Walmart practiced that allowed them to be this massive big box retailer, Amazon has largely disrupted, all right? And so in one sense, Amazon is responsible for the extension of the supply chain, right? This is one of these words in kind of, the business literature of from the point of consumption, of production to consumption, if you will. So it used to be, I have an 8-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And when my kids were very young, I'd have to drive to a physical location like a Target store and buy diapers, right? Well, now Amazon is the largest diaper seller in the world, and diapers are delivered to now new parents' doorsteps, right? That transformation is very significant, and it's impacted numerous communities and workers and reshaping the nature of logistics work as well. So it's highly digitized, right? And it's also expanded a whole new group of workers of, contingent workers in the last mile sector delivery. That's another area with that Amazon has increasingly dominated in. I'm sure Ellen could add.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point to sort of the tax abatement issue, and I think this, because it was an online retailer, it often was able to get around the sales tax, right, for many years in many places, right? And then it also benefits from all sorts of other tax abatements as well. Anytime it's trying to invest in a particular community, it asks for tax abatements, subsidies, and and cities and communities are often, more than willing to, offer all kinds of subsidies and tax abatements for years, right, to this corporation, right? So, and I think that's an important part of the massive rise of this corporation, right? And the ways in which, state governments are sort of complicit with it. And there's a really great website and that I'd encourage people to check out, which is produced by Good Jobs First. It's the Amazon tracker, which is keeping track as best it can of the various tax abatements that cities and counties have provided to Amazon. And it currently it has counted more than $4 billion, right, worth of subsidies that city and county governments have provided to this corporation since the year 2000. It's just astounding, right? And this is just what it's tracked, because sometimes these deals are done behind closed doors. They don't even call themselves Amazon. It often does it in a lot of secrecy. But communities are beginning to push back, which is really exciting. And, some various places have, put some brakes on this, in terms of, the sales tax evasion and the property tax evasion, et cetera. So, I think that's an exciting development that's been occurring. But, but for many, many years, and this still continues today, right, the Amazon benefits from those tax abatements.
Well, I think there's often a way overestimation of the number of jobs or good jobs that are going to be developed in the sector. They way overpromise, and it's not monitored or regulated. Nobody ever comes back and says, but you said you were going to have 10,000 jobs in our community, and you really only have 1,000. They get the tax benefit without actually providing the benefit to the community, and then it cuts off the current physical business structure, because people are going to go to their Amazon instead of shopping locally in a current provider business. So how does Amazon monitor and influence its own customers through technology? How does it use the technologies to gain government contracts? And is there a way for consumers to break free of the excessive consumerism because of the way they monitor what we are looking for on the internet?
Yeah, no, I think, every time we purchase something online, the data is collected on that, right? And Amazon, is specialized in that, so, and it tracks it. It tracks, what kinds of goods are most popular, what prices people are willing to pay for them, and all sorts of information, and as I mentioned, it tracks us not only for Amazon products, right? The goods that it's producing and selling directly, but also all these third-party vendors that are using this retail platform, this online retail platform. And, Amazon sort of manipulates that data, and uses it to its own advantage, So yeah, I think you're right that, one of the ways to sort of resist this is just not to engage in it, right? And maybe, we need to sort of think about, the larger culture of consumerism, right? The sort of instant consumerism that many of us, right, are complicit in, right? The sheer convenience of it, right? But with that, yeah, we are being monitored, right? And helping to, drive the engine, right, of sales for this corporation.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jake?
Yeah, just as an extension to that is also, we mentioned in the cost of free shipping, a descriptive term called Amazonification, that Amazon is increasingly expanding into seemingly very different sectors to dominate. And so, as a public university professor, right? I work at California State University System. It's the largest public university system in the United States. And my university, Cal State Long Beach, was the first CSU to have an Amazon brick and mortar college store on our campus, right? And this has become a national trend where the end of the college bookstore is going to happen, and that's largely going to be driven with this kind of complicity with these public institutions. And so, even taking it further, as Ellen mentioned, is kind of the state corporate nexus, right? Amazon is increasingly seeking to get these massive government military contracts. So whether that's the largest military in the world, the United States, or more recently, Amazon signed a deal with Google and the state of Israel, this massive contract to basically modernize the Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli security. So they're complicit not only in violence and supporting the United States military, but settler violence abroad, right? So I think Amazon's scope is so large and impactful. I mean, Amazon Web Services is powering this call right now, right? And even our book is available on Amazon. So
right.
This brings up a lot of aspects of monopoly capitalism as well.
Good. So kind of switching over, because of everything that they're involved in, we talked about logistics with the shipping and how they transport things all over the world. What's the environmental impact of Amazon? Their warehouses, their truck traffic, their all the things that are combined into getting and shipping goods.
Yeah, it's growing, and this is even as, Amazon has promised to, have net zero carbon, impact, right? It's falling short, in part because it's growing so massively, right? So even if, some of its delivery drivers are, driving in green vehicles and so on, there's many more of them, right? And a lot of them aren't. And there was a very good article that just came out just this past month, from Business Insider, sort of tracking this, right? And so they report that Amazon's total carbon footprint was 60.64 million metric tons. And this is up 19% from the previous year, right? Even amid these promises that it's going to reduce them. So, Amazon has not really followed through on those promises. And in fact, it's growing so massively, its carbon footprint is growing.
I think their advertising is taking advantage of the buzzwords of being environmentally friendly. And any company that, claims that they're doing things to reduce the environmental impact or have, net free carbon emissions and all sorts of things, even if it's not actually going to be put into practice, benefits, because people are looking for that. We know the climate crisis. So
yeah, this is, Amazon epitomizes, corporate greenwashing. The amount of money they spend to convince folks that they are part of the climate solution, of course, is, fallacious, right? It's similar to Amazon's shallow pseudo social justice proclamations they put out, especially in 2020. Amazon was hanging Black Lives Matter banners in warehouses throughout the United States. Meanwhile, Black workers were, facing high rates of exposure to COVID, the high churn, the physical toll of a, relentless pace of work, and, complete stressors and injury rates that are above the industry average that disproportionately impacted workers of color, especially Black workers. So these contradictions are very apparent to the workforce. That's for sure. The blue collar workforce is organizing and dealing with these indignities. But as a environmental impact, if you think about the inefficiencies involved in home delivery, right before the pandemic, I shadowed and drove around Los Angeles County with last mile delivery drivers. So these are technically non-employees of Amazon, right? They wear Amazon uniforms, they drive Amazon branded vehicles, deliver prime goods, but they do not work for Amazon. They work for these small trucking companies, these delivery service partners. I had conversations with countless workers, and sometimes we'd be trekking up several flights of stairs to deliver up an envelope, a package that might have weighed an ounce. Who knows? It could have been a pencil inside the package. We don't know. But a lot of resources went in to deliver these items. And the workers are sometimes what am I doing? I'm, running upstairs, I'm double parked, I'm going to get in trouble if I get a ticket. It is just super inefficient, right? That's one of the differences. There's a lot of environmental problems with the big box model as well. But the expansion into the last mile has driven a lot of community and environmental impact. And we should note that Amazon facilities, last mile delivery centers, are in regions that have high Amazon Prime membership rates. These tend to be urban areas, and the vast majority of Amazon's physical infrastructure are located in poor and working class communities of color. So communities of color and workers of color are disproportionately employed in jobs that are highly surveillance, low wage jobs that are often dangerous jobs. But the community impact is one of environmental racism. But as Ellen mentioned, environmental justice organizations and labor groups are uniting and organizing. The Inland Empire region of Southern California is a great example of that. Ellen can speak to that.
Yeah, and in the Inland Empire, which is about 60 miles east of the port of Los Angeles, Long Beach Harbor, and where it's a lot of goods are coming in and flowing in, and then they flow into the warehouses where they're stored, right? They're brought by truck, right, and so on, and then you've got this fleet of drivers, but they're also carried, by train, by airplane, right? And so it's led not simply to the concentration, very large concentrations of warehouses, but expansions of airports, including the San Bernardino Airport, which was a point of real contention, right? Because this is in a community where air pollution levels are really bad. They're some of the worst in the world, right? And childhood asthma rates are very, very high. So there is not just simply a impact on the environment and the air looking brown, for much of the year, but the real public health impact, right, that takes its toll on children, right, and their asthma rates, and where you have high asthma rates, then you're also more vulnerable to getting other diseases, including COVID-19.
And it seems that the workers at those facilities, they have the triple exploitation model. They're exploited at work. They end up being exploited with their housing because their rents go up often in the communities that those facilities go in. So they have low wage work. They have increase in rents. And then they also have the environmental impact. They're breathing in worse air than anyone else in the country. So it's a triple threat to the people that have to work and live near those facilities. So besides the environmental impact, what is the community impact in lost tax revenues? By offering tax breaks and incentives to bring in Amazon, it ends up closing a lot of the smaller businesses, whether they be smaller businesses in the actual community or nationwide, that are paying the taxes.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think there has been a real toll on many small businesses, but also even larger chains, including grocery chains, right? Which have long been unionized for many years, right? So, I think Amazon has created a real threat, not only to the workers directly working for it, but a lot of workers who are potentially being thrown out of work or threatened, with and we see this in various communities with various stores closing down, mom and pop shops, old hardware stores, independent bookstores, but also grocery stores are shutting down, right? And with them, that's, closing down, unionized jobs, right? So it's a real threat on workers. And then you could also think about what's happening on the delivery side as well, because as Jake mentioned, right, you have all these Amazon drivers. Many of them are not directly employed by the company. They're employed by third-party companies, right, contracted out and so forth. These are subcontracted drivers. They're often not working directly for the unionized delivery companies like UPS, right, or the United Postal Service, for that matter.
Okay, so one of the things with Amazon is their sales platform and how they lure third-party sellers in for their product sales, only to sometimes undercut them. Besides, I mean, one of the things with Amazon, they're taking money at the front end and at the back end. There's the cost of free shipping in your title. It is not free shipping. You pay a fee to be an Amazon Prime customer. So they're getting a fee, like a subscription. They're getting a fee at the front end, but they're also charging people that want to sell their products on their platform 15% fee or whatever to sell it there. Can you talk a little bit about how they lure those third-party sellers to sell their products there and then how they undercut them? So it's totally unfair commerce practices in terms of competition and how they edge them out.
That's right. Yeah. And I think a lot of, third-party vendors feel like they have no choice almost, right? Because the Amazon retail platform has just become so popular, right? And it's, the go-to when people want online sales, they'll go to it, and so many companies, sometimes small independent companies, feel like they have no choice but to sell through Amazon. But as you're pointed out, right, they're paying fees, right, that are often quite high, right, sometimes 15% or more, right, for selling through this platform. And meanwhile, as we mentioned, right, that Amazon is monitoring every sale they do and figuring out, oh, well, maybe we can offer it for just a little bit lower, right, and to undercut their competition. They also have something called the buy box, right, the sort of one-click box where you can click on, so if you're looking for a particular kind of product, it will often offer up, this particular product as like the best, or check out this, right? And it's a one-click buy box, right? That's sought out. And supposedly, Amazon claims that it has a sort of neutral formula through which it determines, which product gets to be in that buy box, right? But part of what goes into that formula is whether or not sellers are using the delivery logistics infrastructure that Amazon is running. So if they use Amazon delivery services, right, they get better points in this algorithm that's supposedly neutral, right? And so I think that's just one of the ways, right, that Amazon sort of lures people in, takes advantage of it, and profits, right, from more and more sellers using their online platform.
I'm going to jump in just because we've got about 1 minute left. So Jake, if you have any final thoughts on that last question that you want to wrap up on.
Yeah. So, Amazon's platform is definitely not neutral. It's aimed to increase Amazon's profit at all scopes. Before we close and get out of here, I just want to mention, as Ellen mentioned earlier, there are a number of movements workers' movements, community struggles that are organizing to resist what we call Amazon capitalism. And so give a follow to Amazonians United, Chicagoland, New York. They're in Inland Empire, the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. There's a lot of climate action groups that are organizing, and Amazon Workers International. And this is a global struggle. So we encourage folks to get the book, and we would be happy to speak to anybody who picks it up and talk to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm going to say one quick thing, Ma, and then I saw you want to say something.
Yeah, I have just one thing to say at the end.
Okay, so I just want to let the listeners know that I know that on this show, we talk about Amazon a lot. We talk about the malignant effect of Amazon on communities. We talk about the pernicious effect of Amazon on the global economy. But that message hasn't really seeped out from our progressive left circle into the general consciousness yet. The general public still sees Amazon as a company that they love. And so this is a conversation, and this is a work, the cost of free shipping, that needs to get out into a general audience. And we have to keep hitting this message because while we hear it all the time, this is not something that the average American, Canadian, whatever, hears on mainstream media or whatever. So when this interview comes out, I would encourage everybody to be sure to send it to those people in your life who are not entrenched in, political action on the progressive left political sphere, because this is something that they're not going to hear. And certainly would encourage people to check out the book, as well as I always recommend people to request their libraries to get these books in stock, because that increases the likelihood that just regular people will be able to see it and kind of learn about this. Ma, last word very quickly.
Yep. Last comment is one of the hugest benefits of this book are those worker testimonials. Power to the people. Everyone needs to read the book, especially if you want to have unionization of a corporation. Power to the people in your workers' testimonials. Fantastic job doing that with them. And
then very, very last thing, Jake and Ellen, I'm going to have you tell the listeners how they can find you on social media or anything that you want to direct them to follow your work. So Jake, how can the listeners find you?
Yeah, so listeners can email me directly, jake.wilson@csulb.edu. Happy to talk to anybody, and also follow me on Twitter, Jake Wilson LB, as in Long Beach at Twitter.
Excellent. Ellen?
Hi, yeah, and happy to also email with anyone at ellen.reese@ucr.edu.
Excellent. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I really feel like this conversation could have went on for a lot longer, but
I have a lot more questions. So
yeah, hopefully we can bring you back on in the future to carry on the conversation, because like I said, this is something that people need to hear about. All right, David, we'll turn it back over to you now.